Hello and welcome to the Small Business Briefing. I'm Brian Kelly, CEO of the Small Business Association of Michigan.
And I'm Kelli Saunders, Vice President of Policy and Engagement here at SBM. I'm filling in for Sarah Miller today, who is on vacation. Brian, we have a new member to welcome. Tyrone Sanders of Obsidian Advocacy Group has joined as an elite member. Their mission is to become a trusted partner with their clients by creating innovative advocacy solutions that empower them with knowledge, resources, and relationships to seamlessly navigate the political landscape and achieve consistent success. So, sounds like I need to make a new friend. Very excited to have them on board. Want to welcome them to SBM. So, Brian, we have a full show today, but let's start with one of our favorite topics, the Corporate Transparency Act. There's a new interim final rule. What does it say?
Okay, so the new interim final rule, which was published on Friday night, so just kind of hot off the presses, if you will, it does basically what we were hoping that it would do, which is to limit those who have to report under the Corporate Transparency Act to only companies that are organized in a different country, companies that are organized in a different country and are doing business in the US. And so what that means is that if any domestic, any domestic company, any company that is formed here in the United States does not have to file. So if you have an LLC, if you formed it by filing with the licensing bureau, the corporations division or bureau within the Michigan government, that is exempt from the filing requirement now under the Corporate Transparency Act. Um, it actually goes a little further than I was expecting in terms of like backing off the Corporate Transparency Act filing requirements in that they go, so if you were to have two, let's say you had two Canadians who formed a company in Michigan, well, that would be a Michigan company. They wouldn't have to report in any way. Or let's say two Michiganders formed a partnership in Ottawa in Canada and then did business in the US because the owners are domestic. They wouldn't have to report. So even if a foreign company had owners that were domestic, those wouldn't have to report. So really, every iteration that I could think of, save for just a domestic or a foreign company doing business in the US, um, is exempt from this. And they gave 30 days for those types of entities. So if you're watching this and you're a foreign company doing business in the US, you have 30 days from Friday to do your first filing or 30 days after you start doing business in the US. Uh, that's a very, very narrow reporting requirement. Like I said, it went further than what we were hoping for, which really for the foreseeable future means that this issue is put to bed.
So, we were laughing a little bit before this conversation because the term interim final rule is kind of an oxymoron. What does that really mean?
Yeah, this is one that only in government could they come up with the phrase of an interim final rule. And what this means is it's different than a proposed rule. So a proposed rule means that the in this case FinCEN, but a federal agency, they propose a rule, there's a public comment period, and then 6 months later, after a certain number of public comments for say 30 days or 60 days, however long they keep it open, then it goes into kind of a black hole. They consider public comments maybe 6 months later, sometimes longer. They publish a final rule. So it's proposed to final. But there is a different type of proposal, and that is the interim final rule, which means that it goes into effect immediately before a public comment period. Now, they'll still go through public comment. They'll still issue a final rule later on. But by doing a proposed final rule, it means that these reporting requirements, or in most cases, the lack thereof, the requirements um, to file, those are in effect right now. So no, if you had it on your to-do list to file a Corporate Transparency Act filing, well, you can scratch it off your list for the foreseeable future.
So, what does this really mean for active lawsuits that are currently in the atmosphere right now? What should we anticipate or expect in that area?
Yeah, so including ours, right? We have a lawsuit, and so a couple things I'll say about this. First is that these changes are being made purely by administrative means, which means that any future president could order the department, FinCEN, the IRS, to reinstitute the onerous rules that we've been fighting before this. So the court action of either Congress either needs to strike this law down or a court needs to declare it unconstitutional. Now, the federal court in Michigan already did declare it unconstitutional on the Fourth Amendment, and as a violation of the Fourth Amendment, and that will likely continue to make its way through the court system. So it's still important for the longer term future that this be struck down. Now, most of the other cases around the country are not, we're not at the stage where they're arguing the merits of the law. They were arguing whether or not an injunction should be issued. Those injunctions are kind of moot now because unless you're a foreign entity reporting or doing business in the U.S., they don't really these reporting requirements don't really matter to you. And even if you were a foreign reporting company, you could you could just form a domestic subsidiary and avoid reporting requirements. It really they might as well go ahead and repeal this law. Under this rule, they might as well go ahead and repeal the law. There's one other issue though, why I think it's going to be important that we carry through with this lawsuit. And that's because millions and millions of businesses have already reported. And the court orders do not require the IRS to destroy that information. So that's a loose end. So number one, we need to make sure that no future president brings this law back by administrative means. Number two, we need to make sure that the IRS destroys the information that they already have.
Well, thanks for the update on this issue. We continue to keep the gas going, and we'll make sure to update everyone as we proceed. But yes, those of our members and small businesses out there that did follow the rules with the roller coaster and the whiplash, as you said, they do deserve to have that information destroyed so that it cannot be used in any sort of way. Let's pivot a little bit. There was a Federal Reserve Board meeting last week, and there were no interest rate cuts. So, what insights did you pick up from that meeting specifically?
I was not surprised that there weren't any cuts. That's what people expected. But what I was really listening for is what are they going to do for what are they projecting for the future? Because you might recall late last year they were talking about several cuts, maybe four cuts or more this during 2025, and then they started backing off that when it seemed like the jobs market was still pretty hot and inflation was just seemed stalled out at a level a little higher than what people were comfortable with. And so there wasn't an expectation for cuts, but in the language it still technically is a wait and see approach on whether or not they are more afraid of recession or more afraid of inflation in the future. But kind of reading between the lines, I think they are leaning more toward interest rate cuts, that they're just signs of a slowing jobs market and part of their mandate. So there's two parts of the mandate the Federal Reserve has: full employment and interest rates, or I mean inflation low. And so those are sometimes competing objectives, but I do expect that they will that it looks to me like the odds of additional interest rates or interest rate cuts in the first place this year are higher after that meeting than what maybe they looked like, say, a month ago.
Let's turn to an update on tariffs. We can't look any way without this coming up in topics in Lansing at the federal level. So there's lots of moving pieces to this. It seems like there's news every day on whether they're stalled or in place. So what's the latest and greatest when it comes to tariffs?
On the tariffs front, I made notes because it is hard to keep track. There's been so many back and forths that have happened. So first is that the steel and aluminum tariffs of 25% globally, those are already in place. Okay, so those are set. I will be really surprised if they change or if they get pulled back. I mean, they could go up higher, I suppose, but I don't think that they're going to be pulled back. Also, the tariffs on Chinese imports to the U.S. Those are at 20%. And so I just, it's hard for me to imagine a scenario where those get canceled or pulled back. I could see a scenario where they go higher if there's an escalating trade war. The Now with respect to Canada and Mexico, it's a little bit like ping pong, where they were proposed and then there was a 30-day extension, and then they went into effect technically for just a little while, and then there was a partial additional 30-day extension, and that partial extension applied to goods that were covered under the USMCA, so the U.S. Mexico Canada um, trade agreement, which was the successor to NAFTA. But that delay was short term, and it's is set to expire on April 2nd. And I said last time I thought that it would go to the end and get extended again, and it did go to the end. They went into effect and then got extended again, but I don't think they're going to get extended next time. And this is just again, I'm not on the inside of the White House, but the fact that this extension matches right up to April 2nd, when the reciprocal tariff um, system is supposed to be put in place, I think that that's when they're going to make the big move. And so wherever Mexico and Canada settle, also the reciprocal tariffs will settle as well. Now, reciprocal tariff policy is something that has been talked about for a long time, but it's administratively difficult to put in place. And what this means is whatever another country does, the US will automatically implement the exact same tariff on imports from that country and from businesses in those countries. So um, it'll be interesting to see what other countries want to do, because if the reciprocal tariff system really does work, I mean, doesn't have a floor on it, then other countries could control whether or not they pay their companies pay a tariff when they're importing into the United States. In other words, if they want free access to the U.S. system, all they have to do is give free access to U.S. companies wanting to do business in their country. That's a that's the concept, but there's a lot of factors at play, and it hasn't actually been implemented like this in the past. It's a lot to keep track of. We think of how many countries and how many different tariff systems and quotas are in place. Final thing that I'll say is that the president did make very clear that they're working on not only trade barriers, tariffs, and a reciprocal system for those, but also other barriers. There's a lot of administrative barriers that other countries and costs that other countries set to protect their domestic industry. So it might not be as blunt as a tariff, but it might require, some sort of expensive import inspection system that takes a long time and is very expensive to get through, and it just makes it's not a tariff, but it operates like a tariff. Those sorts of non-tariff barriers are also being investigated apparently by the feds right now for potential response. So it's a lot to keep track of. But I think we're getting close to the day when the tariffs go into effect, and this delay stops, and really the movement, or I mean the delays and the back and forth maybe settles down a bit. I don't think there's a very good chance that the president's going to change his mind on this. I think that this is a policy that's going to go into effect, and we'll see how it goes.
All right, great update so that we can continue to stay informed. Let's turn back to what's happening here at our state level of government. Discussed on previous small business briefings on the different iterations of the roads plans. We did see a package pass out of the House of Representatives last week, and the governor has given us kind of an outline, if you will, of things that she may want to see. So, what are the chances of a deal? And are there any risks to increase business costs, you think, between the respective two plans? We know that the House and the governor have these two respective plans. The Senate seems to be sitting back and has been pretty clear that they're not going to introduce their own roads plan. So, what does that look like?
Yeah, I'm a little bit skeptical that a big comprehensive deal will make it through the process. Um, the legislative process isn't built for like these big mammoth things with a bunch of components to move through. So it handles digestible piecemeal approaches much more than these kind of big multifaceted packages. So I'm a little skeptical, but the governor's package, I wanted to clear up something. The governor's package has a series of tax increases in it, and none of them are traditional road taxes. They don't include gas taxes or registration fees, those types of hardcore user fee style um, payments. Instead, there's a corporate income tax, which we vehemently and adamantly oppose. We had 4,000, actually almost 5,000 um, uh, responses to our call to action on that. It definitely made a big difference. I'll be really, really surprised if the corporate income tax is seen as a viable part of this package. I think that, thank you to everybody at members of SBM to answering the call and really making your voice heard on that. So I'm feeling pretty good that that part of the package is not going to make it through. On the House Republican side, it was a little bit confusing because there were some articles that talked about a business tax increase from that package, but really what they're talking about is canceling the incentives to a handful of very large corporations and saying, hey, that's general fund dollars. There's no reason that couldn't go to roads if we just stop doing these big incentives. Obviously, for those companies, that's very controversial, but nothing in that plan would be a a broad tax increase. It's a matter of certain tax incentives to literally about a dozen companies in Michigan potentially being zeroed out. But I also think that doesn't have a good chance of making it through to the final process either. And so really, what does that leave you with? The governor had a couple of what I'll call boutique type tax increases and part of it as well, a new digital ad tax. So you place an ad on Facebook and Facebook pays a tax to the US based on however much that digital ad was sold for. Um, there's only one other state that has done anything like that, and I don't know. It's just hard for me to see Michigan being the number two state to do it. And then she also proposed a tax increase on wholesale marijuana or cannabis business. That industry is practically in shambles right now. The price dropping so much and a lot of consolidation and bankruptcies, people otherwise going out of business. Hard for me to imagine $500 million in additional taxes coming from that type of business as well. So what does that leave you with? Well, it leaves you with basically reprioritization within current state spending. So if something happens, I think probably something modest will happen in this next budget, increased dollars toward fixing roads. I seriously doubt it's going to come from new taxes. I think the most likely outcome is that they somehow scrape together, $1 billion or so. I think it's probably about the ceiling that they'll put toward roads in addition to the regular road funding that they already have. And what that would do is essentially a little more than make up for the borrowing dollars that have been kind of propping up the system the last few years because those borrowed proceeds run out next year. So that's the long and short of it. I think that something much more modest will happen, and I will be very surprised if a tax increase makes it through the process.
Well, it'll definitely be an interesting time in Lansing, per usual, as we come to that negotiation and also alongside the budget negotiations that will hopefully be completed by July. So it will be a very active time in Lansing, and we will make sure to keep everyone updated. In addition, our Legislative Action Council will be reviewing these types of proposals too, just to make sure that we're on the front end of making sure that what's good for our members stays at the forefront and doesn't get caught up in anything that we would not see as viable. So, Brian, now we'll kind of go to what you, me, and Jacob love talking about in our free time, which is the 2026 election watch. So let's start with the gubernatorial races. I'll leave it to your discretion if you want to one side of the aisle or the other or both. But there's always a lot to talk about when it comes to this race.
I continue to be surprised at how much action and news and polling is already happening on the 2026 gubernatorial and Senate elections. So, Mitchell Research and Communications did publish a poll that they did for MERS News, and they did the Republican and Dem primaries separately. And of course, who they leave in and out is kind of an art at this point because especially in the Senate, there aren't very many. Um, Maybe there's not any announced candidates yet. But on the governor's side, the they had John James and Tudor Dixon basically neck and neck, 31 and 30%, respectively. Former Attorney General Mike Cox. By the way, John James, member of Congress, has run for Senate a couple of times, got President Trump's endorsement the last couple times. So definitely a well-known name and also has favor of the president. But Tudor Dixon also got the president's endorsement when she ran for governor against Whitmer last time. Um, so both of them have been statewide candidates in the past, and obviously neither of them are in those offices, so they're not um, were not successful. But naturally, John James later went on to serve in Congress. So those are the two top names, and then Cox was also in that poll. Mike Cox, former Attorney General, came in at 10%. Then businessman Harry Johnson at 8%, Eric Nesbitt at 5%, and former Eric Nesbitt, by the way, is the Senate Minority Leader, and for the Republicans, and Tom Leonard, 1%, former Speaker of the House, 15% undecided. At this point, really, you should think of this as like a name ID poll because people aren't really putting out agendas at this point. The Now on the other side, with the Democrats. Jocelyn Benson was way out ahead, 46% to Garland Gilchrist. Jocelyn Benson being Secretary of State, Garland Gilchrist, Colonel Lieutenant Governor under Whitmer at 13%, and then Genesee County Sheriff Craig Swanson at 11%. So those are the names that came up in the primary, but at this point, it really does sort of look like John James. It's kind of his to take. It looks that way in terms of name ID, but it's a big deal for him to step away from Congress. There's no free run at this. It means, if he doesn't run for, if he steps away and runs for governor instead of Congress, it means that he loses the seat um, in Congress. There's a few other names that have been bantered about, but Dixon and John James appear to be the top contenders, and at this point, I would consider the among the Democrats that Jocelyn Benson is the one to beat. She has much higher name ID and a proven ability to fundraise. But of course, Garland Gilchrist and Craig Swanson, both in double digits at least, which means they're not starting from nothing. But I can tell you from firsthand experience that running for governor as lieutenant governor is not exactly the most promising option given the history. The governor casts a very, very long shadow, and standing next to the governor is kind of hard to get attention. So, lieutenant governors have tended to struggle over the years, but ultimately, I think that when I saw the Democratic Lieutenant Governors Association, and yes, there is such a thing as an association called the Democratic Lieutenant Governors Association, has indicated that they have a political action committee, and they'll help Garland Gilchrist out with spending of about 1.5 million. So that's quite a bit of a war chest to come out of the gates with.
And that was both the polling was for primaries, correct, Brian? Because then we also have Mike Duggan out on the side here who's running as an independent. And so while I think the focus right now is definitely on those primaries, as we get to a general, um, as many people have said, you don't count Mike Duggan out when it comes to running a race, but we know there's an uphill battle there. So just want to clarify these were primary polls.
Correct. Yeah, primary polls, and then the general election. There have been some general election um, polls as well. Those are also at this point you consider them to be like name ID polls even more so. So likely primary voters tend to be pretty plugged in. They pay close attention to these things. The likely general election voters pay a little less attention. And so truly that is really just telling you where the name ID is. And as you'd mentioned, Mike Duggan being an independent candidate, and a viable independent candidate, really does change the math. I think um, the next governor of Michigan um, will likely spend about $100 million to win $100 million. Think about that, to win the office of governor, and probably will win with like 42% of the vote because there are three candidates.
Any notes on the Senate you want to make before we end our program today?
Yeah, the Senate is really interesting. People seem apprehensive to get into this race. We're in the governor's race, you have a bunch of people jumping right in. The Senate race, not so much. So um, a few of the names that I was gonna bring up actually, one of the races, on the Republican side, Tudor Dixon was thinking of running as the gubernatorial candidate, but also has said she's considering um, the U.S. Senate race as well. Conventional thinking, kind of on the political street, is that she's waiting to see what John James does. So if John James gets in and runs for governor, she'll run for Senate. She probably wouldn't, not probably, she's definitely not going to take on John James in the Republican primary. But if John James stays put and doesn't run for governor, then I think that there's a good chance that she will look harder at running for governor. But at this point, the smart money says Senate, and Mike Rogers, the one who just lost to Alyssa Slotkin by a razor thin margin, the closest U.S. Senate election since U.S. Senate seats were handled by general election. Um, there was polling on that one as well that had them very close. Dixon 28, Rogers 25. So very, very close. And then also, that same Mitchell poll, when he was testing the Democrats, threw in Gretchen Whitmer's name, and of course she obliterated everybody. So, 59%. But the governor was really explicit in saying she's absolutely not going to be a candidate for the U.S. Senate. Um, you know, I listen for little escape hatches and statements like that, like leaving the door open a little bit, or they say things like, "Oh, I'm not focused on that right now. I'm focused on being governor." No, she didn't say that. She said she's absolutely not running for U.S. Senate, in a way that, well, really, I believed it. Like I think she's not as candidate for U.S. Senate, but she probably would. She would definitely win the nomination if she did. It's hard. It's all speculation because people aren't just jumping in and announcing, but there's strong reason to believe that Dr. Abdul El Sayed who's the health officer for Wayne County, is thinking of running. He ran against Whitmer in 2018. Senator Mallory McMorrow of Royal Oak, um, she really looks like she's just about to announce. So I think there's a very, very good chance. Haley Stevens, a member of Congress from Birmingham, and even McDonald Rivet, representative or member of Congress, Kristen McDonald Rivet, um, has expressed maybe an interest. She just got elected to Congress, and she was just coming off 2 years in the state Senate. And then final name, Attorney General Dana Nessel. Those are all the names that to me look like they're serious about getting in the race. But amazingly, to this point, there are no announced candidates.
Well, that is our election update for today. Definitely will get more interesting. We're starting to actually see other people jump into state house and state senate races already. So this will only start to gear up more and more as we go throughout the year. But that is our programming for today. Thank you so much for being with us. Sarah will be back with you next week, and we hope you have a great week.
Thanks, everybody. See you next week.